Hello, and welcome to Untold Wealth, your favorite economics podcast where we chat about wealth untold. My name is Devon, and I'm joined by my lovely co host,
Vince Balak.
and today our topic will be all about the lovely universes and economic insights of sci fi and fantasy. Cool. So, Vince, you and I, let's be honest with each other, we're big nerds. We're big nerds. We love our sci-fi. We love our fantasy. And throughout our time on this earth, I've fallen in love with a number of universes. All right, and more I've found that I've fallen in love with like the lore of the universe, and that encapsulates everything from like little tidbits to nuggets, the economy, the social structures, hierarchies, different tribes or cultures within a world, and it all just helps me relate so much more to something I'm reading or a game I'm playing or a movie I'm watching. So it's something very near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure it's the same for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think back more so on the economics and finance side of things, in that like some fantasy and sci-fi books have really fleshed out systems, or at least incorporate like modern day economics and finance into them really well. And that is always a little nugget that when I find, I'm like really appreciative of the author for putting it in, just for me
Yeah.
to enjoy and other people who enjoy economics and finance.
It's like a little check mark. It's like, ooh, it just feels so good when they have it. And to even put it further, it just feels good that they have it. It doesn't even need to make complete sense, which is kind of counterintuitive, because I could see maybe from an author's perspective they would feel like it detracts from the story if like it breaks the laws of physics in some way or whatever. Like it doesn't seem to add up, but it's nice if it's quite unique and present.
Yes.
I often don't like get derailed from a story if I'm like, 1 shilling isn't worth a shin in Tamriel. I'm like, no, I'm liking it being fleshed out, even if upon a microscope it doesn't make a lot of sense. So, sci-fi and fantasy. Before this episode started, you asked me which one did I choose? Which one am I going with? I'm going with both. All right. I think mainly economics centered discussion is interesting around sci-fi universes. Fantasy universes tend to be pretty feudal and medieval in nature, but there's still some interesting cases. So what I'm going to do, Vince, is I'm going to share my screen and we're going to do a little exercise together. How about
This
that?
is new.
We're going to do a little exercise together.
This is definitely new territory here.
Yeah, describe what you're seeing on your screen.
That is okay. So what I have in front of me is a tier list from S to D, and below, yet untiered, are a number of sci-fi and possibly fantasy books as well, which I'm guessing you want us to rank.
We're going to be ranking some economies in some of the most well-renowned fantasy universes, sci-fi universes of all time. And I don't want this to necessarily be like a rating of how accurate the economy is, and I don't want it to be a rating of how good the book is. I want it to be somewhere in between, something akin to like coolness or interestingness, or perhaps uniqueness. We can have a variety of factors we choose to go in here, but let's call it coolness for now. How cool is the economy in each of these universes? Right?
I love this idea.
These rank from books to video games to novels to movies, and so there's probably a bit of overlap in between as well. And I've done a bit of research on each of them. Some of these I've read, some of these I've watched. A lot of them I haven't, so I did a little bit of research into. And hopefully we can decide from S, which is the for those of you who don't know what a tier list is, crazy that you don't know, but let me describe it to you. You basically rank little titles in rows. S tier is your favorite titles, and D or F tier are what you were saying aren't good. Basically, like F tier is your worst.
Yes.
So
One
we're
of
going to be doing that.
my topic is actually amongst these ones that
Is
you've
it?
chosen.
I'm going to hazard a guess,
Yes.
but I'll do that afterwards. All right, how about that?
Okay.
Okay. So, lovely listeners, what I'll do is after the show, in the show notes, I'll just save and download this, and then post it somewhere, and then link it, right here, and you guys can decide if you thought our tier list is garbage or not, or you can just make it along the way. Perhaps I'll just share the tier list, and you can make it yourselves. But all right, Vince, we're gonna start with I think is the El Clasico of sci-fi. And that is the Dune series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could we actually save June to the very end of the episode?
All right, fair enough.
I've, not to spoil things, I've taken June as my assignment for this episode.
I knew it would be June. And I'm grateful.
So
I
how
love
about-
June so much.
June is amazing. So how about we do this? Why don't we do everything else? I'll chat about June, and then after I'm done with it, we can decide.
Then we can. Oh, lovely. That's awesome. Okay, cool. We'll skip June. We'll do it after your segment. All right, let's go to Warhammer 40,000. Do you know anything about Warhammer 40,000, Vince?
The only thing I know about, or the only things I know about Warhammer 40k are from you, actually.
I'm a massive Warhammer nerd. My brother and I grew up on the stuff, playing the games. There's YouTube, like short videos and stories. It's really cool. But to give a little synopsis, a little bit of a breakdown of what Warhammer's about. Basically, it's 40,000 years into the future where humanity is a star-spangled nation, millions of homeworlds, but have encountered a variety of different aliens called Xenos. Okay, and essentially the whole kind of just like the backing behind this entire world is that everyone is at war with each other. It is just reimagined future of just all-out warfare between alien nations, and war is everything. So that's kind of where this economy dips in, right? There's different factions. I'm going to be talking about the Imperium of Man, naturally, as well as orcs, because I found them to be quite interesting. But there's tons of other factions that have different economies and cultures. I mean, the Eldari are relatively communist. I mean, the Tau have like a caste system. There are some races that kind of just only eat, and they're called what are they called? It'll come to me. But they kind of like they desire like biomass above all else, right? So there's a lot to love. The Imperium of Man, let's start there. Very, very large. I mean, in the year 40,000, they kind of dipped. They had this golden era in about like 35,000, and then they kind of dipped in around 40,000. They have millions of worlds, but they are very spread thin across this galaxy. Most of their worlds are very undefended against their numerous threats out there in the galaxy. But it's very mechanized, agrarian. Anything that a world produces, they are governed by these governors, and there's imperial tithes that have to be given to the war effort at all times. I mean, on some accounts, it's like 70 to 80% of the production of these worlds has to be given to the military forces of the Imperium, which is awesome. And then, the tithes go to the Emperor, which is kind of this god emperor governs all of the Imperium of Man. He's kind of this psychic administrator that lets them travel through the warp. There's a lot of lore.
There's a lot of parallels to June as well from that one sentence.
Yes. Imperium of Man, they're kind of like your stock standard kind of economy. Some questions to be answered are answered through this use of the warpway and communication between worlds, which, has been thought through and I think is deserved of some recognition. So that's the Imperium of Man. Then there's the Orcs. The Orcs are kind of this hilarious entity in Warhammer 40,000. They look like stereotypical orcs, but they are basically mushrooms, or basically spores that get spawned and get dropped off on planets and then multiply and cause devastation in their wake. They also have this interesting talent, do orcs, that if they put a bunch of like scrap metal together and think really hard together, as like a collective unit that this will be a gun, it will work like a gun. It's like this unique magic system that I think is really cool to the orcs, right? I mean, I'm sure they're not just putting two pieces of metal together and then it behaves like a gun. But if they're thinking about it really hard and they make it look like a gun and it kind of could conceivably work like a gun, it's gonna work, and it's gonna work pretty damn well. Yeah, and their kind of economy is based off teeth, or how they like to call it, teeth. If orcs have more teeth, then they are more renowned. They can purchase and militarize more orcs under them. They're kind of the bigger boss.
That's very unique.
So that is quite unique. Yeah, I mean the Eldari are kind of communist. The Tau have their caste system. There's a few others. There's so many factions in Warhammer 40,000 that I'm not going to get into. But yeah, Warhammer. The fact that this economy revolves around war, all-out war, and it has answers to this webway, the space system. I think it's got to rank up there. I think it's between B and A.
I was thinking B just as a baseline, because there's a lot of variety for sure, but I'm curious about if these other options have more depth.
Okay, well, let's see. We can move it later. So let's go on. Oh, this is a this is a book called Hyperion Candor. I've never actually read it, but there's some cool stories about it. But I was looking into it, and there's not much about the economy of it. It's a really cool story, apparently. But let's move on. A Brave New World. Aha, of course.
Right.
Have you heard of A Brave New World?
I've read A Brave New World. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this really does. It's like a meta commentary on industrialization, basically. Is this entire book. So it actually has quite a lot to do with the economy and how it criticizes the logical extreme of industrialization and consumptions of humans. Basically, Brave New World talks about a different 20th century where humans are developed in certain ways to fill different roles in a society. And one of the cornerstones of those roles that they have to fill is that they are designed to consume and never kind of be satiated. Because, industrialization, one of its roots, I suppose, is that people need to consume for an economy to thrive, right? And if you take to its logical extreme, which I guess Brave New World does, the economy tends to rule over the people, where it's the people really should be utilizing the economy to work for themselves. And I think that's pretty cool.
I like Brave New World's focus on like labor and like the ethics behind like exploitation. I mean, obviously they take it to the extreme where they have like sects of people engineered to kind of have certain functions and nasty stuff like that. But I do great book if you're a fan of economics, because it takes demand to an extreme.
The first like 3 chapters, I think, just go through this.
It's a big lore dump.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's a lore dump, but it goes through kind of, I don't know what it's called.
Like a factory.
It's like a factory of making people, right? And each different section and how they segregate them, and like, they'll put them in different environments from like an embryonic stage, which gets them used to like high altitudes, and those people are going to be pilots, for example. Things like that. It's like wow, it takes it to a staggering extreme. So I have a quote from there, and I think this is quite nice. The problem was to find an economically sounder reason for consuming transport than a mere affection for primroses and landscapes. We condition the masses to hate the country, but simultaneously we condition them to love all country sports. At the same time, we see to it that all country sports shall entail the use of elaborate apparatus so that they consume manufactured articles as well as transport. So these elaborate steps to what is, natural. They don't want people to play normal games, tic-tac-toe. They want them to play expensive games to keep this economy churning and consumption going, to artificially create value and thus consumption. It's like this wicked, wicked idea, that I think was really well elaborated in the book.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
So yeah, Huxley goes to the extreme with this book. I haven't even read the full book. I just know of its excellence. I think I've only read about 100 pages. I think every time I read it, I just come up with an excuse not to finish it, which is like not good of me. But yeah, I think this is a classic. I mean, it is a classic book. If you go to the classics of any bookstore, you'll find A Brave New World. And
Yeah,
I think this whole criticism and this world he creates lands an A. He may not go into the detail of the currency of the worlds and different stuff. You know, even Warhammer doesn't. But I think it's good.
I
think
totally
it's an
agree.
A.
Hey, I was
Brave
gonna
New
say
World. Lovely stuff. We're in agreement. A Brave New World. Definitely give it a read, dear listeners. All right, next, Star Wars. Where are we putting this bad? So, okay, go on.
I was just thinking, like, I'm trying to remember. I know Star Wars has this beautiful galaxies worth of a world, and I'm sure if we dug into like the Wikipedia, we'd find a lot of economics. But off the top of my head, I can't quite even think about like the currency. Is it just credits or something like that?
Yeah, so I did a little bit of digging, and there's a few Reddit posts of people trying to like extrapolate what they can, but I don't think that's true. Like, there's some canon stuff, and there's some games that go on about it. I just think it's it's pretty bland. Like, it doesn't give a lot to it. There's credits, which are kind of this unified currency. There's no explanation as to why credits are used kind of around in the middle and core rims of the world, and used less frequently in outer rims, which are less developed, whereas the middle and core rims are a bit more developed. It's akin to like the EU, where there can be like a unified currency across different countries, but it's never like explained why credits can be used. It doesn't seem like electronic payments can be made in the universe as well, which is a big question. Despite credits being a digital currency, for some reason you can't pay electronically, which I don't know if it's true or not. But the fact that it hasn't been fleshed out, you know, I don't think it's cool. I don't think it's that cool.
I
What are your thoughts?
I think I agree. I think that, you know, Star Wars isn't really about the economy. It's there. You've got like this Imperium Empire, but there are some bits that I remember where, like, you know,
To give it some credit, I mean, they do include like the huts, you know, this kind of, you know, large black
Smuggling
market
underground, yeah.
smuggling family into the world, and their trade routes are quite important. I mean, trade routes are so often brought up in Star Wars, you know, IPs. So,
Do you think
I
it
want to
is-
give them the benefit of the doubt, to be honest.
Do you think it's more or less developed than Warhammer 40k?
I think it's more developed. I do think it's more developed.
Okay.
I think Warhammer is like, it's as developed as they need to tell the story of war is everything, and then they never touch it again. You know, it's like you
Right.
got to protect your mech worlds and your production worlds and your farming worlds for their different resources, and it kind of doesn't touch them from there. So I think it's a bit more developed. I would put them both in B.
Put
I would say Star Wars
higher.
is above.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can agree with that.
All right, and moving on, let's go to the world of Patrick Rothfuss. This is one I've read as well. This is the King Killer Chronicles, right? I don't think this world has a lot of economic structure, but I mean, there's a few different currencies. From my notes, I see currencies of Keld, currencies of the Commonwealth, currencies of Ventus, and how they're different shaped, and a little bit of lore behind them. It's quite interesting. For example, the currency of Kelt. This is the world of King Killer Chronicles. King Killer Chronicles. The first book is The Name of the Wind. Definitely read it. Cool, really cool fantasy. I think it's one of the top 5 fantasy series, even if it hasn't been completed yet. You start with a Shim, Drab, Charter Talent, and 10 of each kind of makes up the high denominator.
Right.
The really cool part from this kind of currency is that if you took a cross section of a gold, like a gold ingot or like an iron ingot, that is what the currency would look like. So if you stack them all on top of each other, it would make kind of like an ingot, which I thought was pretty cool.
So it's like a
hmm.
trapezium kind of.
It's
rhombus
there we
shape.
go. It's a trapezium. Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. The books talk a lot about money lenders and loan sharks and things like that. So they do talk about black market dealings and finer details of an economy, but it's not. It doesn't go into depth, right? It does talk about the different currencies in the different places: a penny, a copper, a silver, and then you go to Vintus. Then there are halved snowballs and then like gold pieces. It's like it's. I think this is a classic C. I don't think it's terrible. They really
Sure.
thought of the currency of this world. I don't know if you read The Name of the Wind. Have you?
I have it on my shelf. I have not read it, unfortunately, just yet. But I think
Despicable. I bought that for you, actually. But Paul and I did. You have to read it.
I
Oh my word.
I will. But I think, as we might find on this list going forward, I think the fantasy novels will suffer a little bit more compared to the sci-fi ones in terms of economies and how cool they are, just because they don't have as much to work with being set in this feudal society and having not as, I guess, the modern luxuries
Yeah.
of economics that we have today.
There is one exception here, and we'll get to it. But yeah, I agree. I mean, feudal societies didn't have, very advanced financial sectors. That's just it. There's only so much you can do. You can't talk about, crazy trade networks and stuff, and
Exactly.
and things that you can do with modern day or futuristic sci-fi. All right, moving on. Eve Online.
Should we just put it at A or S at this point? I think we've spoken quite a bit about it in our previous episode.
I mean, it's an S if we're just talking about like just the sheer remarkability of it. It's just like it's so unique as a game that can just kind of mimic real world and a futuristic sci-fi kind of network. Yeah, I think it's an S.
I feel
It
like
has to be an S.
EVE Online is Star Wars if you took away all the like action adventure and purely focused on intergalactic trade. Like
Yeah, and I
that's
like its uniqueness about mega corporations as well. It just gives it a little mwah. It does have this have this real world trading aspect, of scarce resources and resource trading. But that whole mega corporation little cherry on top, I love it. I
me
love
as
it.
well. I think it's deserved just because I guess it is just a game about fantasy and sci-fi economics. Like it's doing like what it's saying on the tin, and
And if you guys want to learn more, go back to episode 9 where we chat about EVE Online. But all right, let's move on. I don't want my segment to be too long. There's a
No,
few
I'm
different
enjoying
titles
this.
on here. All right, Game of Thrones. I did a little bit of research. All I could figure out is that after Aegon's conquest, which is kind of the Targaryen dynasty, there was one kind of standard currency that got kind of
gold dragons.
implemented. Yeah, gold dragons and smaller silver stags and the pennies. And then kind of if you go past Westeros, you see some other currencies. This to me, I think is a clear D. The economy is not the focus of Game of Thrones. All you need to know is some houses are rich, some aren't. You can hire mercenaries, and that's kind of all that we wanted to go into.
I would maybe bump it up a little bit higher for two reasons. One is because when reading the books, I really enjoyed the fact that there were applications of like economics in terms of like the war frame that Game of Thrones has. Like High Garden and the Reach
That is
has
true.
a bountiful agricultural sector, and so they have the most people. And I think in the show, but also in the books as well, like the Iron Bank, I think it's called. from
Did
Braavosi.
forget about the Iron Bank. of
Like there's,
course.
I guess, some implications that there are consequences for not paying back and taxes and using up reserves and money, but in the show at least it isn't fully realized. Like
Yeah, and
Lannisters-
what was the Iron Bank's army?
they don't have an army; they're just a bank. But they sent a guy to discuss a loan with the Lannisters at some point, and then they got the money but never really repaid back. So maybe not the best example there, but I think there's something there. I don't know
No,
if
there
it
was like
deserves a
there were
D.
these really like expensive mercenaries to be the best like army in the world or something like that.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
You
The
took
name
my
is
tongue, man.
the name is elusive, but
Okay, but listen, I didn't read the books. I watched the series. I love the series. If you vouch for it, now that I'm thinking about it more, fair enough. Fair enough, dude. Fair enough. I'll give it a C. You know, if we're generous, we could even give it a B. But I think, yeah, it doesn't. There's nothing quite unique about it. In my opinion.
I think it's definitely more general, but it does what it does fairly well. So a D I think is fair.
Cool.
Or C,
cool.
sorry, is fair.
All right. Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn. This is a series that I love. Very cool universe. Part of Brandon Sanderson's whole Cosmere kind of thing, where each different like world in this universe has different like physics and what he calls I don't know. I forget now. Oh my word. But all right. I mean, Mistborn. I'm specifically going to talk about the first 3 books. Yeah, thereafter the series hasn't been completed and it kind of just has a time skip. Let's talk about the first 3 books. Basically, there's copper and iron coins. That's it. They're called boxing. The only cool part about this currency is that the whole magic system in this book talks about how different people can utilize metals. They're called elementers. So you can use a metal and its elementic opposite to do different things. For example, you can push pennies to like kind of act like guns, or you can push off pennies to launch yourself in the air and fly. And that's kind of where we see how these currencies being used throughout the books that much. And I think that's interesting to say the least. It's not necessarily that the economy is advanced. It's that the magic system around its currency is pretty, like using coins, to do different things, catching them and fighting off each other. It's very big in the books. So it's like you'll hear of the currency quite a lot. And I don't know if that saves it from being a D, but if it's a D, I think it should be a strong D.
I'm trying to think back that it's a D, I think, is appropriate, just because of the fact that, like, I'm trying to think back, and there's not really anything besides what you said that harkens to, like, an economy. I know there's the villain who's, like, this dictator, and then there's mention of, like, mines and stuff that people work in for, like, resources, but beyond that, there's not too much.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a D. I think it should be a fairly strong D, though. I don't think it's, like, terrible. Most books don't give as much, credit to currency as this does, even if it's using the magic system. All right, moving on. Harry Potter. This one was also fairly plain. There's galleons, sickles, and nuts, and then they have their gold, silver, and bronze counterparts, right?
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
I was reading it, and it doesn't make any sense to me. I must be real with you.
I saw this on your list here, and I was like, what is the, like, exchange system? Because I remember, like, the Harry Potter, like, currency was really weird. And yeah, there's like 17 sickles to a galleon and 29 nuts to a sickle. So there are 493 nuts in a galleon. And that broke my brain. I mean, I understand that it is a, child's fantasy book, and money is kind of like this intangible thing to a kid, but economically I'm like, that makes no sense at all. That is.
And then there's different currencies for the Wizarding Worlds in the US. They're called dragons and sprinks. Don't ask me what those are. I didn't even look at it. And then apparently in France, there's a thing called bezant. I thought this little snippet about the Philosopher's Stone being pretty cool. Like in any fantasy book, I like the idea of a Philosopher's Stone. In like Full Metal Alchemist, which is like very popular anime, and countless other kind of universes, a Philosopher's Stone, exists, and it's kind of this cheat kind of this cheat metal or stone that can just change things, to be different, like change metal to gold or whatever. I think that's pretty cool. The fact that that exists in the story is pretty cool. The fact that you can't, use magic to constantly recreate currency is also cool. Their bank, what's it called? Grimgots?
Yes.
That's cool. These, what are they, gnomes? Are they gnomes?
Goblins.
Goblins, yeah. And that's kind of like, that kind of makes sense. Goblins hoarding well. protecting everyone's gold in like this most vastly complicated bank. I think that's dope. So there's not a lot of depth to it.
I think this is,
and
to
that's
me,
not terrible.
the worst, actually, to be honest with you.
You reckon? You hate the idea of sickles into galleons and nuts into sickles. Doesn't make sense to you.
It doesn't make sense to me, and I think while it could be cool if it was fleshed out more, I think in its current state, economically speaking, if we're talking about cool economies, it is quite uncool, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, like this is a whole magic world. You could do something cooler. No?
I think so.
Okay. I think it's going in D. Potter
Bottom of
fans,
D.
Potterheads, don't hate us. Alright, moving on. I'm gonna... Yeah, let's go Lord of the Rings. No one knows anything about Lord of the Rings currency. we honestly know nothing, to be real with you. It was not focused on at all in the novels, perhaps in the Silmarillion and different novels, but if we're just strictly talking about the Lord of the Rings, yeah, it's pretty bare. It's like nothing. We don't know anything, basically. We know that different cities and states have their own currency, but we don't even know what they're called. Yeah. Lord of the Rings is D tier, which is sad because they're S tier for like every other thing,
I agree. And to remind our dear
Magic, world
listeners,
building, lore.
this is how cool their economy is, not the series itself.
Yes, we love Lord of the Rings. We love it. Imagine how cool it would be if like... Okay, it sounds so nerdy to say it. I was going to be like, imagine how cool it would be if there was like an economy section, but I was like, okay, that's some of the nerdy stuff I've ever talked about. Alright, moving on. Stormlight Archives. This is one of my favorite ever book series. It's kind of like Brandon Sanderson's magnum opus. And it has a really, really, really cool currency system at the very least. I'm not too sure about its entirety of its economy.
The currencies are really cool.
You can infer a lot from the currency, right? And basically, it's that the world has different spheres, okay? And in these spheres are different gemstones, right? And the gemstone in a sphere determines its
denomination.
Its denomination and value. You get bromes, marks, and chips, but you can also get the different type of gem within a brome, mark, or a chip. All right, a chip is your lowest, okay, and a diamond is your lowest type. All right, so one diamond chip is your least worthy, valued nomination of currency, right? And the most valued is emerald. Okay, one emerald brome would be your most valued currency. All right, so emeralds are kind of worth the most, diamonds worth the least, which is interesting in and of itself. Something else to take note is that in the Stormlight Archives, the series, these kind of spheres can hold stormlight, and they can be used to power different contraptions and do different things. I think that's pretty cool. The way they integrate the currency, it also, some mild spoilers, kind of gives people like power as well, like different characters. It's really cool. Like, in terms of fantasy setting, something not sci-fi, they've done like really well with this currency system. I may be explaining it pretty poorly, but the gemstone currency system in the Stormlight Archives is awesome.
I'm a big fan of it
it's
too.
awesome.
I like the fact that not only are they it is just the currency. I don't know about the greater macroeconomics, but I think from the readings that I have done for the Stormlight Archives, which is the first book, there seemed to be a good interconnected trade system going on there as well. But
yeah.
I really like the currencies.
Yeah, really fleshed out world, and there's also politics between the different nations, and the different nations valuing different services and ideals more than others. And that is an economy, right? So I think this has to be at least the best fantasy. And honestly, it's better than Star Wars. So I think it's either A or best of B.
While controversial,
sure.
I think I would agree with you from what I've seen. And maybe this is just me or us not being as versed in Star Wars as we are with Stormlight Archives, but I'm happy to put it there.
Yeah, a lot of the later books also talk a lot about and trade routes therein, and food inefficiency. It's cool. I think out of all the fantasy books, I think this should be up there. Like, yeah, it's kind of a contrast between Lord of the Rings, right? All right, I have 1984 here.
What a classic.
This is a classic. I mean, literally a classic. Yeah, and this book was also kind of a commentary on government intervention. Big Brother. How far should collective thought go within a populace, right? And that is, interestingly enough, all the research I did on it. I mean, the economy vastly differs depending on like who the government says they're fighting, and the economy is mainly based around information, right? Everything is about information in the world of 1984. So that's like really interesting, but there wasn't very much other than that, right? Very much leaves it up to the reader to make their conclusions of what's happening a lot in the book.
Right. I think in 1984, you're kind of focusing on a period of time that's akin to like a Cold War, or like
a constant Cold War.
Yeah. In which, if you like take it from the Soviet perspective of this kind of communism, there isn't as much focus on the economy in the typical way that we think of it nowadays. Like, it's very much focused on the war and making sure that there's enough resources for people to survive and maintain this constant cycle.
Yeah.
So I think in the macro, it's quite cool. Like, this, they've kind of exploded a small bit of like our real world, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
A part of the economy which was happening during the Cold War, and then like blew it up into a global scale, which is pretty cool. But I think if we're comparing it to the others on this list, like, there isn't as much depth in terms of, the specific, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm of two minds.
It's cool. I think it's cool. It's definitely not as fleshed out as others, and that's something we have to factor. But the fact that it's cool, I think we put it in B at the least.
Sure.
At the least.
I think there's some similarities.
It's like an information economy, bro. That's
dope.
It's dope to think about.
It is similar to Warhammer as well, which is also on B, in that there's just constant war. And that's kind of like the focus of it.
I would put it above Warhammer because it's constant war, but it's also, very, and economies are based on, social practices. The social practices are really hammered in 1984. What you're supposed to think and feel at given times, do with your free time. Yeah, 1984. You know what? I'm even considering it above Star Wars. It's cool.
I'm happy with that. Let's keep
All right. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh, my favorite book, dude.
Is it? You like
really
Douglas
love
Adams?
Hitchhikers.
Yeah, I mean, I never read it. I like the movie. In terms of like the currencies, there's kind of just like 5 different currencies if you include the British pound, which is obviously at the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
At the novel. Yeah, you give your opinion. I think your opinion matters more than mine.
Okay. I think Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a great absurdist comedy book.
Oh man.
The mention of the economy in the book, I know there's like mentions of like Alterian dollars to buy like certain drinks.
a Flanian pobble bead. I mean, it's clearly like mocking itself, like while it's naming its currencies, right?
I think, unfortunately, and this is maybe going to shock some people, even though I love this book dearly, I don't think the economy is that cool, or at least it's not cool because it isn't as well thought out as some of the other sci-fi and or fantasy genres we have here.
Sure. All right. Cool. Where would you put it?
I would put it in D, unfortunately.
All right. Cooler than Harry Potter? Probably not.
No.
It's probably not even cooler than Lord of the Rings, to be honest.
No.
Hey, Lord of the Rings ain't last. We won't get that much hate. But all right. This is the definitive, the best sci-fi fantasy economy tier list in the world. We encourage anyone who's watching this to give it a try as well. See if you match up with ours. Tell us why ours is bad or good.
This might be the only sci-fi fantasy economics tier list.
Yeah, I didn't see others on tierlist.com. That's for sure, tiermaker.com.
But we
all right,
still
Vince.
have one
Yes.
world, and that is Dune.
Yeah.
But
Vince, take us away with the lovely universe of Dune.
let's start off with a quote. He who controls the spice controls the universe.
Oh.
For those unfamiliar with Dune, which I think is becoming more and more rare nowadays with this, I think there's going to be a trilogy of movies about the Frank Herbert's set of books. But Dune is really great, not only as just a casual read, but also from someone who has a kind of an economics background like we do. And that really is contextualized by the main resource that I've alluded to in that quote, called spice or melange.
Do you
Spice-
pronounce it melange? I say melange. Melange.
I think I looked up the pronunciation before we started recording it. It might actually be melange, but I just
like the way
misremembered.
it sounds.
It sounds great. But
Spice
this
melange.
spice is I think the most important economic resource in this universe of Dune. It facilitates a lot of things. It's incredibly valuable, not only because people can use it to extend their own life, enhance their kind of mental fortitude, gain psychic powers and potency and things like that, but from the economics perspective, it's also crucial for space navigation. And so you take that importance, and then you also factor in the fact that this spice, melange, can only be found on one planet in the entire universe. And you set the stage for a sci-fi drama that has a lot of cool economic implications, specifically of a monopoly, where the house or the, I guess, emperor designates a single house to control this monopoly and distribute its resources throughout its various guilds and things like that. But what I think makes Dune very interesting, besides the fact that it's very much focused on a monopoly, is the fact that it's also organized into a feudal system. In Dune, there are noble houses that have a long, long history and who've controlled various planets. And in the book, we mainly focus on House Atreides. There's also House Harkonnen and a few others as well. But all of these feudal systems, feudal houses, are vying for control of Arrakis, which is this planet that has the spice, so that they can control its production and essentially gain political power and economic strength because of it. The book follows those kinds of struggles, and it's a really great read. But I think looking at the book itself and the economics within it, I wanted to know if there were any real-world comparisons, like this interesting setting of having a monopoly but also being set in a feudal system. Like, are there any real-world parallels that we can look at in our world and compare it to? And the initial bit was super easy, because spice or melange is a very, I guess, distinct synonym for oil in our real world, or oil and petroleum products. And I was researching this, and then I came across this quote by Frank Herbert that literally said, and I quote, "The scarce water of Dune is an exact analogy of oil scarcity. Chome, which is this very powerful spacing guild, is OPEC." So it seems Arrakis, spice, and the water on Dune is a very good analogy to oil, and specifically OPEC. And maybe even more specifically, the 1973 oil crisis, which happened Am I losing you? Just are you?
No,
with
no,
me so
I'm
far?
following. I'm just
Okay.
trying to figure out what happened there. Was it like US embargoes on OPEC and things like that? I can't
Exactly.
quite remember. Yeah.
So I've been rambling a little bit here, but essentially, oil is this beautiful comparison to spice in the world of June. And the 1973 oil crisis is exactly as you said. There was a embargo placed by Western countries on, or sorry, the other way around. OPEC, which stands for the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, put an embargo against the United States and a few of their allies and rapidly increased the price of oil, which led to shortages and severely impacted the economies of the United States and a few other Western countries. That's what you remember as well, right?
Yeah.
So you can see this a similar thing happen in the world of June, and maybe I'm spoiling things here, but in June itself, the House Atreides goes into possession of the planet Arrakis and are essentially tasked with trying to procure the resource from a very alien and antagonistic force which exists on the planet. The local population and the kind of sandworms, which are these great big behemoths that prohibit the extraction. And so what happens in the book as well, when spice is, I guess, slowly throttled from the rest of the galaxy, is that things shut down. While in the real world, prices increased and there was recessions and things in response to this crisis. In the world of June, people die, space travel and things are completely shut down, and everything goes to shit. To use my own little bit of French there.
Speak French, yeah.
Another thing that I found in my research, more specifically just looking at ancient periods of time where, in a more feudal setting, we found, I don't know if the listeners can hear it, but there is some commotion going on at Devon's place of residence. Okay.
Continue.
So
I'm so sorry.
I wanted to look at more historical examples of feudal societies, or maybe even historic societies, vying over a central, or rather just a valuable resource. And what I came across is the Salt War of 1540. Have you heard of this?
1540. 1540.
1540.
Okay, so I mean, it's probably gonna be like Eastern, Western powers involved, and like Europe, with this kind of stuff, right?
So
It's just before we move on, I just want to tell listeners how cool the world around June is, like the world building. Basically, humanity became the spacefaring nation and had to use AI to use like faster than light travel because they're the only ones who could navigate this, like, I suppose, like navigate these advanced like algorithms to travel through space. Don't ask me more. But eventually, like, AI rebelled, and eventually humanity won, but AI was outlawed. Machines were outlawed, basically. So they had to develop like synthetic humans, and these synthetic humans could traverse the warp. Synthetic humans could calculate vast like numbers and, you know, things like that. But they had to use spice melange. Apparently,
Yes.
it also prolonged human life as well, which was a big boot to it. And this is kind of why it became the most valuable substance in the entirety of like the universe. So that's how cool spice melange is, right? And that's why your liking to oil is so apt, right? Because we use it in pretty much everything as well,
yeah,
right?
to travel.
Especially transport and travel, right?
Exactly. And I think it's kind of a fairly direct comparison. But yeah, in
But yeah,
the
sorry,
Salt,
tangent. So tell me about the Salt Wars.
just a little side note, the Salt War of 1540. In more historic times, salt was a lot more valuable than it is today. But not for the reason that you think. I was always curious about like why salt was so valuable in these historic times. And I was thinking like, oh, maybe it was just difficult to get. You could use it as currency. But from my research, a big part of why salt was so important was preserving meats and fruits and things like that. Like it was obviously, in hindsight, like it makes a lot of sense that people use salt to preserve their food.
Was it good at it? Was it even good at preserving food, or did it like mask the taste of bad food? Like I can't even remember, but I knew it was used for that.
I think very sparingly, mostly in rich districts or very affluent individuals probably had salt with their food. I think most people just use it for its drying properties.
All right, I see.
But there was a city in the Papal States of Italy called Perugia. And they kind of like in June, you had this sector that enjoyed privileges because they had this commodity. In June, it's spice. In the Salt War, as you can guess, it's salt. But this overarching figure of the time, Pope Paul III, decided to levy a new tax on salt for all his subjects, who previously didn't pay any tax at all on salt, which violated quite a few treaties within the city-state, which led to a rebellion by the Perugians that soon enough was crushed by papal troops led by this pope. And so today we see Perugia and the fortress that they built as a symbol of oppressive papal rule, which I think mirrored the fact that in June there is this god emperor-like figure as well, who crushes these houses who rise above their station. And although vying control of Arrakis and its precious resource is one way to get power, you also have this danger of this imperium crushing you if you don't pay your due. And I thought that was a really cool analogy or similarity, I suppose. One other thing, and this is kind of just a hodgepodge of ideas from June, there's a guild, or at least a collection in June called CHOME, which stands for Combine Honeta Ober Advancer Mercantiles, which is a collection of different, in June's world, ancient languages that is essentially the only company in June. They are not only a company, but they are also, I suppose, like a business where the emperor and the great houses, such as House Atreides, are the governing board or the board of directors, and they make their decisions within CHOME. And just extra points for coolness in the fact that Frank Herbert managed to think of a way to combine like feudal societies with a more modern concept like a monopoly in something like CHOME, where these feudal societies and this great emperor are board directors making decisions for the universe in a kind of business capacity.
Yeah,
so,
and I think it's like different sectors give them more influence over CHOME. Like I think whoever holds Arrakis has more seats in it. I remember reading something like that.
yes,
It's really cool.
It's super cool. So yeah, a little bit of a deep dive into the economics of June and maybe some more contemporary and historic comparisons to how, I suppose, how well founded the research was that Frank Herbert did on June and kind of the intricacies behind it. So going back to your tier list, I think June has quite a high place on it. I don't know if you agree.
I mean, it's an S tier, dude. It's straight up. It has to be an S tier. I think it might be above EVE Online as well. It is the quintessential sci-fi economy. It has just this remarkable commodity at the center of it all. Great world building, intricate, politics, a feudal system mixed with a starfaring realm. It's just like, it's got it all, man. It's got it all.
Really does.
Different warfare. I mean, shield generators. You can't use lasers on shield generators. It's just a cool fact because then it creates like a nuclear explosion. So basically, they all fight with knives, man. It's like awesome. Yeah, projectile weapons basically are useless. Lasers and knives, which can pierce shields, are the only things that can be used. So it's like everything has been so thought through in the Dune world. I think he also developed like the biology of the Dune world, like, you know, obviously the sandworms, everything else that just makes this world conducive to creating spies. It's awesome. It's awesome.
He's made a sci-fi setting that's kind of a feudal setting, but kept the really cool sci-fi economic elements in it, which I think is a feat, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, there's even different factions. There's a faction called the Bene Gesserit that kind of just like, there's these groups of like female only, like a cult basically, and they can like look into the future and control people with like different words and phrases, and it's just like, oh man, it's like everything just gets you so excited when you hear about Dune, or gets me so excited. Yeah, no, I think it's an S. I think it's an easy S. I think it's the best. I don't think that anything is better.
I agree. And dear listeners, if you have a book of the sci-fi fantasy genre that you think we should have included, or that you recommend us and everyone else check out because of its really cool economy, please do drop it in the comments. Leave just a good detailed description of where you can find it as well. And while you're there, please do rate us 5 stars, give us a like, maybe even a subscribe if you've enjoyed the content so far. Yeah. Anything else you want to add before I sign off?
Nope. I had fun, and that was awesome.
I love the idea of a tier list. That's such a great idea for this topic in particular.
All right, find the tier list down below. All right, I'm definitely gonna link it there.
Please do. But until next time, I've been Vince.
And I've been Devon.
And this has been Untold Month. We'll see you next time.